Hi, welcome back to Recipe to Revenue. It's Leah Messina, your host. Today, I am very excited to welcome somebody who spent 3 decades in shaping the commercial engines behind some of the most successful food and beverage and ingredient brands in the industry. DeAnn Petersson is the founder of Sunburst Sales Innovation and the author of The Sunburst Effect, a powerful framework for aligning sales, marketing, product, and operations around a shared commercial vision. DeAnn's journey started on a Northern California agricultural farm, giving her a first-hand look at how products move from field to shelf. Since then, she's led teams, transformed divisions, and helped organizations from global brands to mid-market manufacturers turn complexity into clarity and build sustainable, profitable growth. Her work is all about helping leaders shift from reactive to intentional. And today, she's here to share the mindset, systems, and strategies that create unstoppable momentum. DeAnn, welcome to the show. Hi, DeAnn. It is so great to have you here today on Recipe to Revenue. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited today to hear about the sales side of the food and beverage industry. I know it is something that founders and brand owners just, is so critical to their success. And I know you have so much great information to share with us today of some of the things that they should be thinking about as they're growing and scaling their brands. So thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And yes, a busy time of the year. So we're glad to get a chance to have you on the show, in between all the holiday seasons here. So let's just start off kind of, from the top. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the sales world and started your business.
Well, so actually, I was born and raised in the food and beverage industry on an agricultural farm in California. And that's really where I started in the food and beverage world when you think about it. And farming teaches you a lot about living life and being humble and working hard. And I worked at the local grocery store, family-owned grocery store through college. And then after college, I went into the corporate food and beverage world in sales. And that's really where I got classically trained in sales and strategy and leadership and all of the great things that big corporate companies give us in our careers. And I called on, I think, every type of food and beverage outlet, whether it was food service, retail, unconventional channels, travel, all of it. And then I moved into leadership. That really taught me about kind of the core tenets of strategy and everyday execution for sales. And then over time, what I started to see is that we really took that excellence and execution for granted, because in big companies, you have that structure and all of the support and the planning. And as I went to smaller companies, I started seeing that they don't always benefit. Mid-market or growing companies don't always benefit from that structure. And I started doing that work inside of companies, really starting to turn the corner on go-to-market execution. And over time, that led me to consulting in that space, because I found that, number one, there's a huge demand for it. And companies that are looking to grow really appreciate that structure. And bringing in some of those classic capabilities from what you get in that corporate world, but applying them in the mid-market space in a way that makes sense for those clients.
Yeah. And that's such a great point. In the corporate space, there is all that support and structure and infrastructure. And it's such an interesting dynamic between, you think of small businesses, they can move fast, they can pivot fast. But when it comes to things like getting into grocery and retail and these unconventional locations, that is such a monumental task for a smaller mid-sized company to tackle. And they don't have the support a big company does.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of what we all wish to become in a smaller mid-market company. All of the things that big companies accomplish every day without even thinking about it. But what big companies don't have is that ability to pivot and navigate and respond to customers and consumer needs quickly. Yeah. So it is kind of a balance and a trade-off. And I think the tricky part of it is not to get so overly structured and focused on bringing in those processes and systems to a point where you're paralyzed and have to give up that, we call it sort of, you want big company muscle, but small company hustle. And you don't want to give that up along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way to put it. So as you were looking into going into the consulting world and you saw this opportunity in the mid-market size, how did you kind of pull together your offering of what you could do for them?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I really came to realize in the corporate world is that sales can often become an island. The rest of the organization could be very connected to the strategy, and then we would be over in sales sort of being the last to know about what was happening. And so it really became my personal goal to get sales a seat at the table, number one, when the decisions are being made, but also to have the companies I work with understand that sales is just a part of a go-to-market engine. Yeah. And you'll never achieve your growth plans if you are not thinking about that as a connected system. Right. So in our book, in the Sunburst Effect, but it really shows that our frameworks and our systems are all about starting with alignment first and making sure that you're clear on what it is you're trying to achieve, and then aligning the team around it. And it's easy to say that. It's much more difficult to do that. So we try to put together the frameworks and then work within those frameworks, right? We're everything we do is fairly developed for the client, but we found that our frameworks are pretty much the same. It's really just how it applies to that client's business. So when we were putting those together, we were putting them together based on what has worked for us in the last 30 years that we've been creating this.
Yeah. Yeah. How long did that process take for you to put together the frameworks, to pulling all that knowledge from so long together?
Well, pulling it together, I would say, took us to build it. Obviously, we learned by doing. And then over time, I think we built little pieces at a time. So we have, for example, a customer segmentation model that I started building in 2005. And we actually have just now created the IP for using that model and taking it into clients. I think we did 4 years ago was our first running it with external clients. And then putting everything together for the book actually didn't take that long because we just knew what we do all the time. It was really more a process of just putting it together in a way that made sense for people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think your book is so well laid out and so approachable in the material. And here, I have it here, so I'll hold it up for the camera.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes. And I have a couple of questions for you on that we'll get to, but walk us through, kind of, you have a potential client out there, kind of where you said that they're, mid-market, but where are they in their life cycle? And then why do they come to you?
Typically, it almost really doesn't matter where they are in their development as a company, but they are not getting the sales results that they want. Yeah. And usually they think they have a problem with sales. And so it always starts with, could you help us fix our sales problem? And when we come in and map their go-to-market systems, we usually find that you have really talented and committed salespeople, but you're probably not doing the alignment pieces between sales and marketing and operations and all of the things that deliver growth and the customer experience in the way that you need it to. So it could be a smaller company looking to grow and one person doing all of those functions, or it could be a larger company that has they may have a great strategy in place, have spent a lot of time on their strategy, and they're just not seeing the results that they want to achieve. But usually it starts with, we have a sales problem.
Yeah. And what is, besides not getting a seat at the table earlier, what are some of the areas where you see that they're misstepping?
So there's that idea. Well, let's talk about what a seat at the table really means, because as you're developing your strategy, you could have a great idea to expand into a new channel, for example. If you don't have salespeople who are familiar with the channel, have relationships in the channel, understand how to penetrate that channel, it's just an idea. So the idea of having that seat at the table, even as you're developing your strategy, is that the leadership then of the sales organization can think to themselves, what is my role in achieving this? And how can I get prepared to get there? And there's any number of ways, right? Internally or externally that you need to prepare. But the idea is that getting truly integrated into the growth plan of the company and making sure that your team is in the best position to go and execute that. So then it's aligning compensation systems to make sure those compensation systems award the team for doing the things that are developed in the growth plan, not just maintaining business, but actually growing. So there's a lot of things that the leadership needs to be thinking about in order to make that system work together.
Yeah. How often do you recommend a company review their compensation plans?
As often as they are reviewing their growth strategies. So the compensation plans really need to connect to the growth strategy. Even if it's, we've got an example, I'll share an example of a client that had a very ambitious growth plan, but just wasn't seeing the traction that they needed to see on the growth plan. And as we mapped it back, we realized that their compensation, it was a commission compensation that really motivates people to maintain the business that they have. Because if I already have that commission coming in, I want to maintain that commission. So we really talked with them about maybe you don't need to change that base compensation, but how are you going to reward those growth initiatives? So if you are pursuing some kind of transformational growth in your business and your compensation is not aligned to that, chances are you're working against yourself. You're creating that friction in the business really quite unnecessarily. So for me, salespeople, we like to be able to know what our compensation is going to look like. We need to be able to track it. We like to win by nature. So it can't be a mystery, but also it can't be changing all the time either, because people really, that's their livelihood. So they really, as long as you can make sure that you're rewarding the right behavior.
Yeah. So for people that are just going to maybe in the earlier stages of setting up, maybe hiring some of their first salespeople, what would, besides commission, which I think a lot of people obviously are familiar with, what would some alternatives to that be that are more incentivizing?
Yeah, I mean, commonly the large companies would give you that base compensation and then bonuses based on performance. Usually, as companies are growing towards that, you might do quarterly bonuses on top of base compensation, some type of hybrid approach where there's a compensation that they know they can count on, that, and then there's incentive, especially for going above and beyond. Because with sales, we like to be rewarded for going above and beyond. Not so much that it's difficult to get there. It needs to be attainable, just like all goals. But if you put that opportunity, that carrot out there, typically salespeople will be ready to go after it. But you've got to align up all of the pieces behind it, the resources, the marketing efforts, everything has to be aligned up behind that as well. So compensation, I would say, is just one component of it.
Yeah. And that's exactly where my mind went with, okay, that's great that they're, going to be having all these great bonus structures, but how could they meet those if they don't have the right marketing material to support them or the right messaging? So as a consultant, how deep do you get into those other avenues with companies you're working with?
Well, because we're thinking about it as a go-to-market system, we're thinking about all of those avenues. So if it's about the messaging, one of the things that really does, you can tell if an organization is aligned, if people are communicating the same messages externally. And it's very common, for example, marketing will have one message for a campaign and sales is out with another message because either they didn't get the memo
Right.
or they don't agree with that marketing message. They never align to it. So we're thinking about it from the customer all the way back into the organization. And depending, what you may be a company that sells what you make or a company that makes what you sell. But either way, it has to go all the way back into that service and delivery model for your customer base too. So we think of it as part of a bigger system, and that alignment is so absolutely critical that sales is, even though we say we're sales experts, it's just one component of the whole bigger picture.
Yeah, because you're really even talking about internal communications at that point of how sales being shared.
Absolutely.
Top down,
we say
left, right.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times what happens is you communicate it once, you think it's done.
Yeah.
And we talk with our clients. They'll tell you I love it when people repeat back to me the things that they're just sick of me saying. And so it used to be that you had to say something at least 7 times and communicate it at least 7 times before it really stuck. And that was before we had all of these messages coming to us from all around us all the time. So now I just say, you're never done. I don't care if you did it 7 times. I don't care if you did it 20 times. You need to assume that it's the first time they're hearing it until they say, please stop.
Yeah. Okay, I got it. I understand.
But it's worth it. I mean, I'm doing some work right now on a project, and we're looking at research around what alignment can do for your business, just the business metrics of it. Forrester, which is pretty common in our industry, does a lot of research around food and beverage and sales performance. 32%. Just think about that. You can grow 32% just by aligning sales and marketing in messaging and activity and execution. You don't have to spend another dime. You don't have to hire more people. You don't have to do more things. You just have to line those up. Wow. That's pretty incredible for anyone who's thinking about how do I grow and thinking that it always requires investment. It may be an investment of time and an investment of focus, but it's not always an investment of money. And big companies can show you that time and time again. It's not always about what you spend.
I love that message so much. It's really important everybody just heard that piece of advice because, that's a question that a lot of people want to know too. Is, what can I do that's low cost to get my name out in the biggest way? Budget's already allocated for the quarter, but we need to push this through. Just align your message.
Just align your message and your efforts.
Yeah.
Have marketing go out with sales. Participate on some calls, hear what customers are saying, hear the objections that are coming in, and partner together on handling those and finding the solutions. Just those actions make all of the investment. To me, I consider it like exponential return. So if it was good for me just to spend the money and get the returns that I would organically get, what are the things that I can layer on top of that to make those returns, first of all, differentiating, and secondly, more differentiating than my competition, because that's going to give me an edge in the marketplace.
Right. Yeah, that's a good one too. And, it's not always easy to take for marketing to take the time to go out with sales, but hugely valuable experience. So how do you recommend for companies when they can't do that or time is limited for sales to relay the message back internally? What are some tactics?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I mean, the one simple way, which can also go very sideways if you allow it to, is that you use a common CRM. So using technology, if you don't have the time to put people on the road, we call those 4-legged sales calls. If you don't have time for the 4-legged sales call, but teaching your organization, and the thing is, in this day and age, you can get a CRM very affordably. Yeah. It doesn't have to be, completely custom. Doesn't have to be like Salesforce.com, where now you actually have to have a whole organization to create it for you. But making sure that you're teaching sales what information is helpful. Don't tell me everything. Tell me what I can do to help you. But then at the same time, sales has to believe and see that marketing and other parts of the organization are going in and mining that information, following up on it, wanting to learn more, and truly using the system, because there's nothing more frustrating than reporting back and just feeling like you're reporting back into the echo chamber.
Yeah, it's nothing.
Right. So, I mean, I'm one of those people that thinks, hey, a CRM is a great thing, and I've been an advocate of it for a long time, but you can also use it in a way that is not effective for your organization. So it's all about just putting in the technology does nothing. It's all about in how the organization utilizes it and adopts it,
right,
and uses it to be differentiating in terms of the understanding of the customer. So that's one way. And the second way, I'm working with a client right now to input a product management function. It's a product-based company. It's been in business for over 50 years, and they've never had a formal product management function. They've had engineering and they've had all these different resources. So we're putting in a product management function right now and building out their internal tools and all of the processes that they're doing. And one of the things that they said is, well, we don't talk to customers. I said, no, you didn't talk to customers. There's nothing that prevents you from that. And the closest thing to the customer is a sales guy right down the hall. So maybe just start having internal conversations as well. Ask the questions.
Yeah. I know when you do peel it back, it is like, it's just simple information. It's like the basics of what people should be doing, but things get so complicated and there's so many moving parts in business. I think some of these things tend to get overlooked. So really important to remember that.
The thing is, we think about it as the 3 I's. We have instinct, right? So salespeople operate on instinct, because instinct is typically when you perceive danger, which to me in my world is the competitor, typically. And so I operate on instinct and I take action, and that action is based on intuition. Well, that intuition is what I've learned over my 30 years of doing this, what I believe is going to be the right action at that time. And those two things are so critically important. And I think those are the things that we talk about with those smaller companies who are really able to pivot and respond with speed and have customers feel like they care. But it's really that third I, which is intention, that is going to be what gives you that long-term growth potential. Because even in those moments where instinct is the right call, leaders have to bring the team back to the intention and say, okay, that was fine. We needed to do that, but let's not forget where we're going, where we're driving towards. Because if we're just constantly responding and not thinking about how I intentionally go and learn about the market, how we intentionally improve our go-to-market execution, we'll just you'll never have that predictable and reliable growth.
Yeah. It's always reactive, and reactivity is not consistent.
No, I mean, you get lucky. Get lucky. And if you're good at reacting, that serves you for a long time. We call that sort of that instinct intuition. Let's call it the killer combo. We've mastered that killer combo. But as your business scales, as in today's world, it gets so much more complex with channels. Now you might be direct to consumer, you might be wholesale, you could be working with OEMs. All of that's only going to get you so far. So that's when you really have to make that transition, but still not lose that killer combo, because that killer combo is needed in the right moment.
Yeah. For brands that are coming to market or maybe in market already, there's some that decide to go just D2C, some that just go white label. What do you think is a good combination, or is it really a case by case situation?
I think it's a case by case situation because I think it's where is your consumer going to buy from you. So we actually have, I think you and I might have spoken about this before, but we actually have a dairy-free ice cream business that we have in addition to our consulting business, which is great because it keeps us very involved on the operational side of food and beverage.
Sure.
But it's a very niche business that we're in. And what we found going into this business is going through distribution is a challenge because I not only have to convince distribution that there's a consumer market out there for this product, which we know that there is, but then I have to convince them to convince customers that there's a consumer market out there. So in our case, we've actually thought, we gave that a try for a couple of years and kind of got a light bulb here recently that we may just be in a better place to go D2C and then drive it backwards from the consumer versus trying to push it from the back end out, go with a pull strategy. But I really think it's about what you're selling and who you're trying to target. Our audience happens to be very Gen Z millennial who's very comfortable buying online and having food shipped across the country and those types of things. That may not be the case for how your end customers want to buy or need to buy. So I think choosing your channel and your path to market is really based on how that consumer wants to find you.
Yeah. And that goes back, I think, to something you said earlier about, creating your customer personas and really identifying that and then making sure that kind of goes down the line to sales.
Absolutely. And making sure that you're not trying to if you're likely going to market or you're in that process that we've been in for a couple of years of getting to market, don't try to serve everybody. Serve that target market, your ideal customer profile, serve the heck out of them. And then you'll have the opportunity to expand and grow from there. I think that's one of the things that we've seen is that a lot of companies try to go broad very quickly and they will burn bright, but they might just burn bright for a short period of time. And then the next one that comes in is going to burn brighter. So if you really want to create that connection with your audience, focus on who they are and let them find your brand where they spend their time.
Yeah. That's such a very interesting nuance in that. And I love the idea of finding that specific audience, kind of, niching down to the audience, kind of owning that space. So then from that point, then do you recommend for that brand to say, oh, we're seeing some traction with, this audience here on the side, to just start doing some marketing and sales to them or doing some more product development that's a little bit more geared towards that audience? Like, how do you start to embrace some of those other areas once you've owned your initial niche?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to a conversation that earlier part of our conversation, which is, okay, so I see some, we'll call them green shoots of growth or some interest over there. But are we really set up to serve that market?
Yeah.
So because that's really the first question. I was at a event in October talking to someone who said, we really think our next market is airlines. It was a snack company. And I'm like, okay, interesting. Do you know how that market works? Yeah. Well, I mean, we think we do. And, having come from a big food company and selling into airlines, what I can tell you is you don't make money on airlines. And so if you're a growing company, if you're going to airlines to get visibility and to get sampling, that's a different story. If you think that's a growth market for you, you might regret that later. So it's really about understanding why you would want to go to that market, how you would get to that market, and then most importantly, are you infrastructured to be able to serve it? Because, call it growing pains if you want, but some markets take a lot to develop them.
Yeah.
You got offered a national placement at Target. That might be your dream come true.
Mm-hmm.
What it takes to serve that national placement at Target, you may very likely not be ready for. And you may say, well, we've just got to make it work. But if you get one chance and that one chance gets blown, that could be it.
Yeah. Yeah. And for a small brand, they may not be able to recover from that. Whereas, larger companies have deeper pockets and more relationships to leverage.
Absolutely. And then the other thing that happens, like for a smaller brand, you might go, I was talking to someone who went and built their own, they had been using outside manufacturing as they should. It was the right play. Well, once they got that big placement opportunity, they decided to build their own kitchens. Well, now they have these kitchens. It ended up being an in and out item. And now they have all of this capacity that they need to try to figure out how to fill. But in that moment, when they wanted to go after that and they thought, this is our launching pad, they went for it. And I understand completely why. But to your point, they may be one of those that doesn't recover from it.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are the sad lessons to have to experience, because you're just so full of hope and bright dreams and like, oh, this is it. And you go all in. But so as you're evaluating those, those moments of should we do this or not, what are some things people should consider?
Well, the first thing that I would consider in a food and beverage CPG world, there's a lot of manufacturing capability out there. So, and there's a lot of open capacity. You might have to find that open capacity. You may have to work a little bit, but there's people out there. If you're trying to go, we call it from the farm stand to the store, right? You want to get out of the farmer's market. You want to get to the shelf. There's a lot of people who can help you commercialize your products, make them so that they are retail ready or food service ready. From a formulary standpoint, from manufacturing, from food safety, all of those things, you don't need to become that expert. Those experts are all around you. And then tapping into that expertise, tapping into that capacity, it's a pay as you go model typically. So you're wisely scaling your business to match where the opportunity is.
Right.
And so, but I did grow up on a farm, so I probably live in the more conservative space. We have completely bootstrapped the ice cream business that we did. We haven't taken any loans or any outside investment. But if you want to have a long-term business that's sustainable and financially viable, you just need to balance the risk reward with what's right in front of you that could be the next big thing to what's a practical way to grow your business and scale it. If it sounds too good to be true, it might be. Yes, I'll say that.
Yes, usually is. So going back to the point you just made about, bootstrapping and kind of pay as you go, which is, I've had different people share different opinions on the podcast about how much it takes to start a brand. Curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think you had someone on a podcast that was talking about spending $10,000 or $20,000 to develop a product. Is that right?
Yes,
and
yes.
That could really seem like a lot of money until you start thinking about $2 to $3 million to stand up some sort of manufacturing.
Right.
So it's about having the quality product and the resources to get it where you need it to go. And so I think that if you want to go big, fast, shine bright, then you are going to need a lot of money. You're going to have to move fast. Your customer acquisition costs are going to be more. You're not patient for people to come and find you organically. And, the ice cream business that we have, we've honestly never advertised. It's all word of mouth. And we did that intentionally because we thought at the right time, we'll put the advertising in that will pay off.
Right.
And so I think it becomes that balance between speed. If you feel like there's a huge competitive market and you've got to get out there fast and you've got to get out there first, then maybe you need the big money for that to go fast.
Yeah.
Like I said, my nature, farm girl, ingredients, big CPG, I would say it doesn't cost that much to get going. It's what it costs you to scale and how fast you want to scale.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely an important point for people to consider, where they are on that fast train or not, slow and steady wins the race, or there's a lot of competition.
It's probably in your risk profile too, right?
Yeah.
Some people, they'll say, I'm going to put my chips in the table and see where it goes. And look at how many of those have panned out over time. And you probably could find that many and more that didn't, but you don't hear about them as much.
Sure. Yeah. There's not too many people, a couple out there, but not too many people are fast to share their, I don't want to even call it a failure story because there's still so much to learn. It's, learning moments, and that could have sparked a whole different idea or business, but
absolutely.
So we have a few minutes left. And so I want to, go back to something a little bit nuanced that you mentioned in your book, and you brought it up earlier about CRMs, but really the question is when do you bring in other people? So you say a pro tip not to delegate. So let's talk about delegating for a moment. And in the book, you'd say about when you're building out your CRM, it's really easy to just say, oh, we're going to hire a, CRM company. They do this all the time. They're the expert, but they're just not close enough to the sales team to really know what's going on. And you end up with something that's over or under engineered. And, coming from the marketing agency side too, we see that so often in companies that we work with. It's just like the solution that they got just doesn't work for them. So what do you think
they spend a bunch of money on it, so they don't want to get rid of it?
No, of course not. They're like, oh yes, we just dropped a bunch of money on this. We're stuck with it now. I've heard the term "stuck with it now" so often. But how do you balance that? You don't have a CRM expert in house. How do you bring in the right people but still keep the team close enough to the process?
Yeah, we did. Even for our consulting company, we hired a marketing agency, let's call it 18 months ago, as we were getting ready to launch the book, and it was time for a refresh from our little bootstrap little marketing that we had when we started. And I learned a pretty hard lesson in that if you hire someone who really doesn't understand your business, comes from a place, there might be great people and have great intentions and be great marketers, for example, for the type of businesses that they're used to working with. You don't really have the time to teach them your world. Right. So what I would say is there are, especially if you think about food and beverage and looking to hire resources that can help you, there's so much knowledge that's out there that can just bridge that gap where they're coming in and saying, okay, so what type of, don't think about, for example, the CRM system, and I need someone who's really good at technology. I need someone who's really good at my world that understands that can bridge that gap. And whether it's food development and food science, or if it's sales, that you're not looking for someone who's just really good at the function. You need someone who understands your world and who understands that functional capability. And we say that with our clients a lot. We have an immediate shorthand with our clients because we come from their world. And it's part of what's happening with us working with generational family businesses or working with scaling companies. We've been in that world so we can understand not just the business realities, but I think the emotional realities of, I talked to a founder who said, every time I bring in a salesperson, it just never works out. Like, So is that always the salesperson's fault? Or did you
Yeah.
maybe
There might be a pattern here.
you maybe didn't expect, had a little unrealistic expectations of what that person could do. And then also that you finally said, oh, I can just give it to them and be on my way, focused on the things I want to focus on. And I think it's, you have to stay engaged. Like we say on the CRM, you have to stay engaged enough to make sure that your focus and your goals are being reflected, but also be able to find those people who can get there pretty quickly so that you're not also having to train them on your world.
Right. Right. Yeah. The learning curve sometimes is not worth it to the experience on the technology or the function.
Right. Absolutely.
Yes. Good advice there. So as you know, we always ask our guest one last question to wrap up the episode. And that has been, what is your recipe to revenue?
Recipe to revenue. So my career has really been about always learning. So I think that the recipe is be curious. So as a whether you're a founder, whether you're an executive leader as a company, always be curious and growing, always learning. Second is stay humble. Even when you have success, know that next setback is likely around the corner. And sometimes they can be big setbacks, but they can be small. But every one of those is a learning experience. And then I think for me, the biggest thing has always be open to possibility, because my career, if I would have mapped where I'm at and what I've done, there's no way I could have mapped it. I said, wow, I can see this opportunity and it has possibility. And I see that for my clients. When I work with clients, I bring them possibility. And for our own business, instead of just being so myopically focused on what we want to be open to the possibilities that present themselves. And you don't even know where that next opportunity is around the corner.
Right. Excellent advice overall. Thank you so much, DeAnn, for sharing everything that you did today. And for those that are interested in reading the book, again, I highly recommend it. I know it's available on Amazon, and they can find you and tell us the name of your ice cream and just where they can find out more about it, since we talked about that.
Yeah. So, our consulting business is Sunburst Sales Innovation. And you can find me on LinkedIn there, which is where you can also find out a little bit more information about our ice cream company, because both of those are connected to me. We're a B2B brand on the ice cream right now. We're a B2B brand. But you can find ice cream makers out there who are selling dairy free would be using our product if it's made from pea protein. And if you're thinking about your go-to-market and wondering where you have opportunities or things that you're kind of thinking, yeah, I thought I had a sales problem, but maybe I have a little bit more than that. We have an assessment available on our website. There's also a QR code in the book where you can just go do a quick free assessment and just get some ideas about where you might have some opportunities in your go-to-market engine.
Excellent. Yes. And we will share that link as well with the episode. So look down below to click that and take assessment and see where you're at. Again, DeAnn, thank you so much for joining me. It's been such a pleasure to have you. And I think the information that you shared today will be so useful for everybody as they're thinking about where they are with their business, how they can scale. Maybe the problem goes a little bit deeper than just this sales team like they thought it was. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.